And welcome to Oregon State University's Farm to Fork webinar series. Our intention is to really bring you stories about our food systems, how they work, and really more importantly, how they're changing to be more sustainable and resilient. And a peek kind of behind the curtains by the people who are helping to drive that really productive change. Our food systems are really diverse. And so our intention is to bring you stories that really reflect that diversity. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to today's topic and speaker, which will be Oregon Coastal Visitors Association, how tourism protects food from the sea on the People's Coast. Please help me welcome Marcus Hinz.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a great pleasure. Yes, Marcus Hinz, Oregon Coast Visitors Association, which I'll be referring to as OCVA. We are the regional destination management organization, and we have a very large region. But as to the question of why tourism is involved in food systems, that's a very common question, and I want to address that right up front. When you think about food and tourism, you might automatically go to culinary tourism and restaurants. But I wanted to bring up a very important aspect of cultural tourism. And just realize that each of these vessels has its own story and its unique relationship to the families that run them. So cultural heritage is one why, and tourism is involved with food systems. Another reason is our stakeholders. Every other year we do a very thorough industry engagement with our stakeholders. I pulled up the 2018 process because this was the last time that food was specifically asked about. And in this one, 611 community leaders talked about food systems, answered this survey. And you'll notice, like in the middle column, the priority for visitors to experience locally grown and produce food was 64%. So that's very high. And I want to reiterate, these were 611 community leaders. Another reason why is visitors and their spending. So in every category of type of visitor, the number one spend and number one activity they participate in is food. So of every category, hotels, restaurants, other retail, recreation, food is the number one earner in the visitor economy. And you'll see here, it's approaching almost $4 billion a year. So going to the matter of us being involved in food systems, how did we get here is often a question. So, typical story, COVID hit and supply chains failed. The supply trucks stopped coming over the coastal mountain range. Food stores and restaurants started to fail because they could not get access to inventory. And then we asked the question, well, where is our food coming from? So we commissioned a study that took almost 2 years, well over a year, to find out that 90% of the seafood consumed along the Oregon coast is not from Oregon. So the reality is, planes are flying out with our seafood, planes are flying in with seafood from other countries, the ocean is dying, and it's just madness. And if you think about other regions, like Oregon wine country is in the valley, Eastern Oregon has Pendleton Roundup and, cowboys and Oregon country beef. Seafood comes from the coast, and so seafood is our unique food proposition as a tourism region. So we started the Oregon Ocean Cluster Initiative to address this, because if you think about it, if most of the food we're selling is not from here, that means there is massive economic leakage in our economy. Now, the reason, the way I got to hundreds of millions is if visitors are spending on the Oregon coast, it's really about 800 to 840 million a year. Now, if most of the food we're selling is not from here, I've used the golden standard for restaurants, 30-30-30, which is 30% overhead, 30% labor, and 30% food costs. Now, if it's 20 to 30% economic leakage, we're talking hundreds of millions. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we selling and why? Now, economists might kind of scoff at my estimates. That's fine. I challenge them to do a study and prove me wrong. I would love to have the solid data. But we know that bringing more visitors to spend money here doesn't make a lot of sense unless we can stop the economic leakage. So Just to review, why is tourism working in food systems? It's our stakeholders. It's the top visitor spend. We have an opportunity to prevent economic leakage. And it really aligns with Travel Oregon's 10-year strategic vision. I want to say up front, it's really important to understand that ACWA is not doing all of this work alone. We have a dozen and a half partners on the ground that we're doing this with. And so I don't want people watching the presentation to assume that, it's just us doing all of this work. That wouldn't be true. So now we talked about why tourism is involved in food systems, and now I want to talk about how we are involved. So as I said, we are the Regional Destination Management Organization. We occupy a very unique place because we have a regional perspective. We operate cross-jurisdictionally across 7 counties, 28 cities, 14 ports. We are built to help solve larger scale problems in systematic ways. And we are also a C6. We're not a C3, which would be social benefit nonprofit. We are a C6, which is a business association. ACWA is not doing this alone. We have many, many partners, economic development agencies, ports, school systems, community colleges, so on and so forth. So how are we going about this? Well, if you believe the food system is a system, then you can't just fix one part of it and call it good. We need a 360-degree approach, multidimensional and multidisciplinary approach to this. But we must address each of these. And as an example, in infrastructure, we cannot deploy a commercial canner on the Oregon coast without a trained workforce to run that. And so we work with the OSU Seafood Research Center in Astoria to do that. So I'll tackle resources first. I'm not going to read all of this, but at this point we have acquired close to $2 million to do this work. A large chunk is coming from the state legislature any day now. And then we have about another million or two kind of hopefully in the near future to help us out. But I think this is really going to take tens of millions of dollars to do this right. But essentially, there's overwhelming need in small local processing, packaging, storage, and distribution. I'll just pull one thing out from this, and that's we invested in an urchin ranch. The Oregon Kelp Alliance has been sending divers down and scraping urchins off the bottom. The urchins have been eating the kelp forests. Once they do, they kind of starve, go into dormancy. They've been scraping them out, putting them in vats at the Port of Bandon, and then they're being fed and raised. The urchin runways were a dozen different runways holding 200 urchins that were fed different kinds of food to see which would be the best. And we are actually bringing these to market now. Bandon Dunes has purple urchins, Oregon purple urchins on the menu. There is a producer, and she has a great story about her struggles and what she's been experiencing trying to grow a small value-added food product here in Oregon.
The universe works in really weird ways, and I feel like everything has kind of come full circle. When I moved up here to the Pacific Northwest 5 years ago, I came up with the intention to start my fish business, whatever that meant. Instead of buying a fancy car, I bought a work van that one day I thought I would be hauling fish around, and to finally be doing that definitely puts a smile on my face.
What do fish take to stay healthy? Vitamin C.
I worked in a beautiful country where tinned fish and the art of the preservation of fish is at the core of their culture. It's there where I really embrace this simple way of approaching food in a very natural way. There's a lack of canneries on the coast of Oregon that will cater to a small business with bespoke recipes. There's a lack of infrastructure here, which basically means that I have to then source from larger fishing communities and fisheries as opposed to the smaller coastal communities here on the Oregon coast. A lot of the fish species that we have, we actually export, and we don't actually eat locally, which is such a sad thing to think about because it's so delicious. Part of the reason that I really wanted to start this company was to be able to give back to a community on a bigger scale than I was currently doing in restaurants. All right, so we've got some delicious oysters, which are my favorite. And of course, Tarts Bay is just right over there, so extremely local, close to the source, which means they're incredibly delicious. What separates my product from a lot of the other products that you see in the tin fish market today is that I make the recipes myself, and I'll make the spice mixes myself or the wet mixes and deliver them to the cannery. I want to really focus on utilizing the under-realized species here that we have in abundance. I would like to see Tiny Fish Company grow into maybe a not so tiny fish company. I think for me, if it's in the ocean, this is a sustainable product, then I'll cook with it.
So moving on to transportation, again, a lot of information here. I just want to pull out the top one, mobile processing. Now this would be a very modest size, lightweight, movable mobile processing unit that could be species diverse and move from port to port to service multiple small fishers. And the other exciting piece is that it would be capable of going from high school to high school with everything inside of it to teach seafood butchery and fillet. It would have a fillet counter, 3-part sink, ice, a fish grinder for the waste, and a vacuum seal and other stuff. So that's an example of what we're working on. And again, we'd work with the OSU Seafood Research Center for the HACCP certifications and that the fishers would need to use this facility. In the workforce space, in the upper right-hand corner, you can see it says Capital Access Map. We've plotted out all the different places that small businesses can get access to loans and capital to scale their businesses up. And with the K-12 system and community colleges, we are right now starting 6 seafood butchery pilots in 6 different high schools along the coast. We introduced Oregon seaweed and urchins to hundreds of thousands of consumers. It was a consumer education campaign. We got these products, urchins and seaweed, right into the hands of chefs, made those market connections. Chefs showed us what could be done with these products. Very amazing things were accomplished. And so they're very positive, and we did a few things all at the same time. And then these are projects we have. There's a map. A link will be in the chat. You can see where our projects are existing. Again, we have a diversity of different partners. You can see all these categories right here. Public health, environmental, research, etc. And please join us, reach out, and everyone has a role to play in helping us fix our food systems.
So first of all, thank you so much for that. It's, I have to say, one of the reasons I was so excited for you to do this is I really learned about the work that you and your team are doing with your collaborative partners probably 3 years ago, I think. And it's just so impressive to me that it's really made me, far more paying more attention to what are not only what you guys are doing, but also the implications outside coastal systems as well, in terms of just the models that you're really exploring and demonstrating. In the meantime, there are a few questions that I had offline. One is, what are the ways that that people, whether those are nonprofits or seafood processors, or others, what are some of the ways that they can positively impact the strategic priorities that you guys are pursuing? What are the specific ways that people can really engage in this to help move it forward?
Yeah, great question, and thank you for that. We believe, because this is a food system and it needs a systemic approach, and we also need to not just find solutions, but we need to institutionalize these solutions into different agencies and organizations forever. And so, this is not a kind of a hit and run project. This is something we're dedicated to for a very long time. And so, there's food hubs that traditionally don't include seafood into their operations, and so that could be amended. I think that their programming could be amended. Maybe their staffing could include seafood specialists. I think there needs to be more collaboration between smaller operators with overlapping service areas. For educational institutions, there's a lot of knowledge that has been passed down just generation to generation informally within the industry. And because of the graying of the fleet, a lot of that knowledge is being lost. And so that is why we are developing seafood, butchery, and fillet trainings and getting the curriculum into K-12 schools. Same with commercial live tanks. It's really been an industry thing, but we need to get that knowledge into our education system so it can live on forever and inform younger fishers. How about greening of the fleet with kids coming out of our high schools, and let's find a way to keep them here by giving them the skills to participate in our natural resource economy and bridge that gap between our natural resources and tourism. So that's some examples depending on what type of organization you're in. A lot of infrastructure is needed. So technical assistance, I think, is a huge role for OSU in many ways to play. Businesses and new businesses will need new technical assistance training for new types of equipment and infrastructure that we need to install. So I hope that's some examples that would answer your question.
One thing I was curious about is how challenging has funding, regardless of that source of funding, how challenging has funding been to support these initiatives? And then importantly, how have you seen that change in the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, so the funding is tricky for us specifically because we're not a C3. 501c3, we are typically excluded from a lot of private foundations because our status is a C6. But as our network has grown, as the Oregon Ocean Cluster initiative has grown, we have a lot of nonprofits that are involved in here, and each of them can do work on the ground in their own communities. And so we've been finding grants and passing them to these nonprofits, in many cases even paying for the grant writer to write the grants. Like I said, one of the unique things that we can offer is that we do offer capacity to help organizations meet their own missions that are in line with the Oregon Ocean Cluster and keeping local seafood local. So that's a technical challenge. But recently, I think, as we have seen, there's a lot of money coming down from the federal government on infrastructure of all kinds. And so we've been catching some of that. Our Coastal Caucus, we are deeply thankful for them putting a bill through the legislature that got us that 1.19 million, which we're going to start implementing soon. So it's been a little interesting trying to catch the money and deploy it. But the more partners we have, the easier that will become.
And are there foundations, so nonprofit organizations who are particularly interested in coastal systems?
Yes, there are foundations that are interested in coastal systems, and there's a big story to be told here, because the way that we harvest and process food does have a lot to do with the environment and protecting the environment. The title of this was, how does tourism protect food from the sea? While we're reducing our carbon footprint. Like, that is an environmental issue that I think environmental foundations could really help us dig into, reducing the carbon footprint, and also by increasing the infrastructure, the processing, cleaner water, reducing food miles. So yeah, there are some, but I think there's not always an immediate connection between food and the environment, and I think that story just has to be told a little better. So there's some bright ideas out there. We welcome everyone to come in and help us tell the story.
Thank you. Hannah has a couple of questions. First, when you advocate for restaurants on the coast to use local seafood, does it continue past the Winter Waters events? Also, do you use the opportunity to help them source other Oregon products, or are they already doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Seafood, many of the species are very seasonal. And so, tuna starts to pop off the docks, in summer around August. Rockfish and groundfish are year-round, but other species, the Dungeness crab, of course, are winter. And so our association is primarily focused on seafood because there are food hubs on the ground on the coast that are involved with terrestrial food. And, we're not about stepping on toes or duplicating services. And so we've kind of moved just into the seafood space because no one was really doing this with seafood. Seafood and the commercial fishing industry really has not had champions out there in the private sector. Like, we're a private business association, and so we can do things that maybe government agencies can't in ways. And so that's why we're primarily focusing on seafood. And yes, seasonally, this is a forever campaign year round. And I think the more that restaurants and food stores can offer seasonal seafood to meet the rhythms of the planet, the better everyone will be.
Thank you. And then the last question is from Hannah, and it is, she's interested in what you see is needed to support full fish utilization on the Oregon coast. And that's probably a big question, but what would the top 3 things be if it is a complex question?
Yeah, that is, we have a long way to go for 100% fish utilization. There are some parts of, take shellfish, for instance. Shellfish, the shells are very, very valuable. Products are being made, even in this country, but certainly around the world, in antifungal sprays for crops. They're used in medical equipment because they're kind of antifungal, so Band-Aids and sutures and things like that. And in many cases, the shell is worth more than the meat inside. But we do not really have the infrastructure on the Oregon coast to capture those products and turn them into value-added products and distribute those and access the very lucrative marketplaces. So that's one example. And the other is just the waste itself. I had met a BIPOC farmer at a food event who was really wanting to get access to seafood waste, the scraps, because they were interested in creating very high level potent product for what's the word? My brain is kind of missing it right now, but fertilizer. So I think it was called mud bone, if my memory serves me correctly. So making that local connection in Oregon. And by the way, I want to finish with saying, this is not an Oregon coast issue. This is an Oregon issue. Every school and every hospital, every restaurant, food store in this state should be able to get access to Oregon landed seafood.
Thank you. Well, thank you again so much, Marcus, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And thanks to those of you for joining us for this presentation. We would love your feedback. This is only as meaningful as it's meaningful for you. So you'll see a link in the chat to a short survey. We'd appreciate your input on topics that you're interested in, or other things. And that'll also be shared via email if you don't have time to do it today. And we do these monthly. And so we would love to have you join us next week and this is actually the wrong topic, so my apologies, but where SEDCOR from the Salem area, the Economic Development Organization, is going to join us, where they're going to talk about cultivating opportunity in the Willamette Valley. So you'll see that information come to you shortly, and we hope that you sign up and join us. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.